Johnson's division on September the 19th in the afternoon. This is a culmination of all of what Rosecrans has been doing over basically the last week, getting his army out of the mountains to the southwest of where the battle winds up eventually occurring. Consolidating the elements of his command, moving northeastward in the valley of West Chickamauga Creek on the west side, using West Chickamauga Creek as a barrier or obstacle between himself and Braxton Bragg. Tom Crittenden's 21st Corps is blocking the main road between where Bragg had gone down towards Lafayette and Chattanooga to the north. Crittenden's at the Lee and Gordon's Mill area and essentially is astride that main corridor back to Chattanooga, while Thomas and McCook and the cavalry come out of the mountains to the southwest and move up to link up with Crittenden. Of course, what Rosecrans wants to do is get his army out of the mountains and get it shifted to the north to protect newly won but only lightly garrisoned Chattanooga. And he's been doing that for the last several days. And of course, Alexander McCook and the cavalry have got the longest way to go. They won't go into the details of it, but they have a pretty torturous route back. They get to make the most mountain climbs and descents of any of the Union troops. And on the 17th and 18th, McCook's Corps comes over Lookout Mountain into McLemore's Cove, and then on the morning of the 19th, with the actions of the 18th having given clear indication that Bragg is going to try to get in between the Union Army and Chattanooga, Rosecrans wants to move troops to the north as quickly as possible, and McCook is ordered to get his three divisions, Jefferson Davis's division, Phil Sheridan's division, and Richard Johnson's division on the road and start marching north. And Johnson's division starts out from positions that morning of the 19th in front or to the west of Catlett's Gap, as he described it, in front of Catlett's Gap, which is where Georgia Highway 136 goes through Pigeon Mountain today. But he's on the west side of West Chickamauga Creek, in the area of the southern Pond Springs, and also up towards Gower's Ford. But Johnson's division, which had been picketing there since the 18th, the morning of the 19th, is pulled off of that picket line, and they begin marching north. Some officers report they march only 3 or 4 miles. It's a lot further. Most of them, 10 to 12 miles are their reported distances, but they will march up. What's one thing every soldier is looking for? Water. And they stop at Crawfish Springs. Oh, I should say, as they come up the road, they actually are behind the action at Glass's Mill at that moment. And these columns, there's a lot of start and stop, and particularly as they stop to fill their canteens at Crawfish Springs. The Johnson's division column is stretched out on the road far enough to the south that they are literally behind the fight going on at Glass's Mill. And there's artillery projectiles coming by. There's yet another William Haynes Lytle premonition of death incident that occurs. More illustration of just how famous he was in the United States. Everybody can't resist the temptation to say that they were with Lytle shortly before his death. But they'll march up, stopping at Crawfish Springs. Gus Willich's brigade is leading the division column, and then as the other two brigades do the same, they will continue up from Crawfish Springs and come up what becomes the Dry Valley Road. The movement of Johnson's division also helps us time Rosecrans' movement of his headquarters from Crawfish Springs to the Widow Glens, because almost everybody in the division says that when they get to Crawfish Springs, Rosecrans' headquarters is there. But then there are quite a few men in the division who say, as they marched north of Crawfish Springs, Rosecrans and his headquarters group passed them. And then there are accounts from them that say they passed Rosecrans' headquarters again, which would be when it was at the Widow Glens. But they'll come up the Dry Valley Road, Rosecrans orders McCook to detach Johnson and send him to George Thomas, who is becoming the commander on the left of the Union line. And Johnson's division will turn onto the onto the Glen Kelly Road and march northward into Thomas's sector. And the Park Commission maps done by the veterans in the 1890s show Johnson's division turning onto the road that comes in directly from the west at Kelly's, one of the arms of roads that allows many Federals to call that Kelly's Crossroads. But they then will begin to deploy in the woods just to the west of Kelly's. And I think when we get down on Battle Line Road, we'll say a little bit more about their deployment. But they've had a march of 10 to 12 miles that morning. Many of the men had an opportunity to cook and eat something that morning. Some units had gotten a new issue of rations. They'd all had a chance to fill their canteens at Crawfish Springs. But now they are marching towards the sound of this growing fight here to the north. So, David?
Just that, notice that as Rosecrans is starting to commit troops, he's committing troops without regard to corps organization. That will become an increasing factor all through the battle. But Johnson's division is of the 20th Corps. Thomas commands the 14th Corps. As the fight develops, you'll see that we'll also be talking about a division of the 21st Corps. So the beginning of the sort of breakdown in the standard Corps wire diagram structure of the Army is happening.
But at least at this point with Johnson, when Johnson is sent to Thomas, everybody in the chain, up and down, knows clearly what is happening. Rosecrans has told McCook to detach Johnson and send him to Thomas, and Thomas has been informed that Johnson is being detached and sent to you, and you are now responsible for Johnson. And Johnson knows that. Johnson knows that his boss is now George Thomas, not Alexander McCook. There are other instances where that change in authority is not.
It's going to get murkier.
Murkier.
But right now, it is pretty clear.
Right. With Johnson's division, it is very clear. Unlike on Bragg's side, where by early afternoon of the 19th, there have already been several of these shifts of authority, and in almost none of those instances has there been the clarity of communication about this unit now answers to this person. So it's an interesting contrast in leadership and unity of command within in the two armies.
And I would also finally say that Johnson is an admirer of Thomas. Is happy to be working with George Thomas. will go on to write glowingly about Thomas in later years. So there's no real command issue right now.
They're both old Army men, relatively contemporaneous in age and service. They both, let's see, were they ever in the same cavalry regiments? I'd have to
I
look
do
back.
not believe so.
Yeah,
I think they crossed paths, but I don't think they served.
Right,
in the same
but they both branch transferred to the new light cavalry in
Yes.
the late 1850s, so they've got a kind of a similar mindset and a similar set of recent experiences. And the fact that that they would be selected to branch transfer to what was essentially then a new branch, is also an indication that some people in the hierarchy looked favorably upon Johnson.
Essentially going into hand-picked regiments.
Right. And Johnson is somebody we don't hear a lot about overall during the war, but I think a lot of that is just kind of his quiet modesty, and he's not in that way really not much different than George Thomas,
Yeah.
Except that Thomas becomes a corps commander and an army commander.
Johnson's memoir is very modest and
So there's except for incidents and praise for members of his staff. This may be the division staff that we know the most personal about the personal life of the division staff officers. There's actually not a great deal in his memoirs about what he did.
Right.
It's all about what other people did. So
yeah.
yeah. So he I guess his modesty kind of obscures really his capabilities.
Yeah, and he also wrote a history of the old 2nd Division, which is his division here, and it's also basically filled with praise for the troops.
Yeah, he's a West Point man.
Yes.
Yeah.
I forget what year.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. No, but I think they are there at the same time.
They overlap.
Yeah, they overlap.
It just shows you how unassuming he is. I can't remember his class.
Yeah, and he has long service in the Army after the war. And that in and of itself is just another testament to the fact that lots of his contemporaries viewed him as very competent. So.
Steady, reliable.
See, I never understood some of these promotions, and I understand that for a fact, but when a regular Army officer who served before the war is breveted in the regular Army, but then when after the war they go back to, some of them were captains, and then they were made breveted major generals, and then they came out as a colonel in the regular Army. So I don't understand what the purpose is during the Civil War, why they would brevet in regular Army rank.
Well, to suppress the rebellion, Lincoln and the Congress recognized we need far more troops in the field than the regular army. And so the Congress passes laws creating the volunteer service, where under those laws they're going to ask the states to organize units, either activate the militia in the state or organize units under the provisions of the Volunteer Act, and then tender those to the federal government. And that creates an entirely different grade structure. And so there's as this occurs in 1861, there's suddenly a need for a whole lot of officers in the regular service. The states are organizing regiments. They now all of a sudden need a whole bunch of colonels to command these regiments. And yes, we can denigrate many of these early war people by saying they're lawyers and politicians and that kind of thing. But there's also lots and lots and lots of evidence that the governors are trying to find really good people to lead their regiments. Of course, the West Point appointments are by congressional district from the states. And so many of these West Point graduates in the regular Army are known to people in the states. And somebody says, well, why don't we ask Captain so-and-so of the 4th Infantry, if he will be a colonel for us. And of course, many of those captains see an opportunity there. And the regular army basically gives them leave from their assignment in the 4th Infantry to then become a volunteer officer. And so they then might become a colonel, they might become then a brigadier general of volunteers or a major general of volunteers, rise up that chain. But in the regular army, they're still just a captain in their regiment. Well, both the regular army and the volunteer army, the congressional structure has a limitation on the number of generals and captains and lieutenants that there can be.
I wasn't aware of that limitation.
And that's still the case today.
You can only have
Whereas
213,000, whatever.
there's Lieutenant Colonel Phil Baker. Did you ever get the P after your name?
No.
Probably when you went from major to lieutenant colonel.
Right. We're waiting for the list,
Right.
they can't, if you come out on the lieutenant colonel's list, all those guys can't put on the rank and get that pay the next day. The banks don't work that way,
Yeah.
so you have to wait.
Because there are only so many authorized slots for lieutenant colonels in the Army, and he had to literally wait. He was on wherever he was on the majors list. He had to literally wait until everybody ahead of him on the majors list had been able to be moved into a lieutenant colonel's slot.
And that sometimes causes your roommate to be promoted the month before you are, before your number came up. And he'd go around going, "No, come on, come on, I told me, sir."
Because he might be an infantry officer and you an armor officer, and there's a available slot in the infantry sooner than there is in the armor.
I didn't think it worked like that. Once we talked about slots and
Right,
I understand all that, so it
Right,
makes all
so-
sense now,
so the-
And they shrunk it down after the war.
The volunteer army goes away.
Yeah, sure.
And so, but you've got some people who want to stay in the army, and some of those people are people the army would like to have. But then there's a real problem. There aren't enough slots for them in the regular army. They established this system, but you've got some of these guys who are doing really well as volunteers, but how do you reward them? You can't promote them because there's no slot to promote them into. And so what they said was, for these regular officers who were serving in the volunteers, oh, I know a way we can reward you for your gallant service in the volunteers. We will brevet you 1 grade higher in the regular service. Let's see.
So they're still getting paid while they're on leave, so to speak, from the regular army. Are they still earning their?
No.
See, that's why I get confused.
They're not
that is,
double-dipping.
No,
I
they're-
understand if you're a
They've
captain.
taken what amounts to a leave of absence.
Okay, so it's just like more unpaid leave and they're,
Yeah.
so-
But they're getting paid in the volunteer service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No,
And-
and they're being paid as a colonel in the volunteer or brigadier general.
Yeah.
But a brevet is a title without any increase in pay or
Yes.
any, it's
Recognition,
merely
more or less,
an honorific recognizing whatever service.
But it does move you up on the.
That's true.
And after the Mexican War, they did authorize those who had been breveted to be paid at the higher grade, even though they were still serving at that lower grade.
They didn't do that. There
Right.
were way too many.
That changed a lot of things I've had in the army structure.
Yeah, and you were also entitled to be called at your brevet grade.
Famously, Custer at Cheatham, everybody calls him General Custer. He's a colonel.
Yeah, and that he was general in volunteers, lieutenant colonel in the regular army. So So it's really elaborate, and it has probably brought nightmares back to the mind of Lieutenant Colonel Baker here.
I think I was a major P for like 6 months.
Yeah.
By the way, Johnson graduated 1849.
Yeah.
Looked it up.
So it's on $10.
Here's our Indiana. If you look, turn the sheet over. Look on the back. Just look on the back of the whole thing. No. Fred, look on the very last. Yeah. Oh, okay. There's the order of battle.
The Confederates are on the back, the very section.
That will list the regiments of the division, their strengths and heads.
So we've got one crazy Pennsylvania group in there.
Yeah, that's crazy.
The only way I will,
All right, so what we want to do is transition down onto Battle Line Road. On September the 20th, that's what the monuments, markers, tablets, and plaques denote. But we're going to be here on September the 19th today, and look at things from that perspective. But I begin here because if you look through the gap in the trees there, and some of you all might have to move around just a little bit, but just to the right of the gap, you should be able to see the Kelly cabin. And at the time of the Civil War, there was a road that came into the Lafayette Road from the west, and not exactly opposite, but just a few yards separating it on this side of the Lafayette Road was a road that came this way. And some of you all, I think, have been with us at one time or another when we have done a program where we've actually walked a little bit of the road. The Park Commission actually reestablished both of those as Park Commission roads, but the National Military Park really hasn't maintained them as such in more than 40 years now. Although there is a trail on the road on the other side, or on the road alignment on the other side of the Lafayette Road. But that's what makes that area, the south end of the Kelly Field area, to many the Kelly Crossroads at the time. By the Johnson Division accounts, his division marching up from the south along the Glen Kelly Road, and approaching this area, Johnson begins to deploy his division out of line of march in the woods on the other side of the Lafayette Road. August Willich's brigade first, and then the other two brigades are going to deploy. As this occurs, as Willich's brigade begins to deploy from the column of march on the road, that's going to slow things down, and the other two brigades in the column are going to have to halt and wait just a little bit. And while that is occurring, the 93rd Ohio in Baldwin's brigade is down by the Dyer Tan Yard on the Glen Kelly Road, and an overshot Confederate artillery projectile comes over the trees and into his column, mortally wounding one member of the 93rd, a man who will die the next day from that injury. So they clearly know that they are going to be going into to battle. As the other two brigades come up, the 3rd Brigade under Philemon Baldwin, the colonel of the 6th Indiana, but the senior officer in that brigade, Baldwin's brigade, deploys to Willich's left, and then Joseph Dodge's 3rd Brigade is going to deploy in support behind Willich to the right front of the division, and Baldwin to the left front of the division. And all 3 brigades are going to deploy with 2 regiments up and 2 regiments back. Based on Casey's tactics, and in fact almost every federal division in this battle initially deploys 2 brigades up and 1 brigade back, and each brigade with 2 regiments up and 2 regiments back. This initial deployment is in the woods on the other side of the Lafayette Road. Then when they will begin their advance, they'll come out of, for some of them, they'll be in the field. They'll come out of the woods across the cornfield. Others will just continue through the woods in their front, and they will move out towards the sound of the battle. And they are told that they are here to protect the left of the army. They are to redeem the recent setback, meaning Baird's division being driven off of the field in late morning, and to protect the left end of the line. So, and to reclaim the ground that had been lost by Baird's division. And the way they write it, I guess they thought they were having to reclaim Brannan's ground too. So, but in particular, Baird's.
They know that Baird and Brannan had gone into the woods ahead of them. That's obviously information given to Johnson by Thomas and disseminated down at least at a regimental level. That's so that potentially they don't run into and start shooting other friendly troops. But they also know that the federal troops have been outflanked from the south, and so they're looking. And I'm sure part of their mission, though they don't really say it, but I'm sure part of their mission is this continuing look for the Confederate flank in turn and turn it.
It is, well, the night had been cold enough to frost, but it is now warming up, and most participants who describe the temperature of the day on the 19th will say it is hot. Now, exactly how warm, nobody has a thermometer and records an actual temperature for us. And then the other thing to remember is that they're moving around, being shot at, so even at only 60 degrees, they could perspire enough to soak their clothing through. And where this normally comes up then is in reference to what happens on the night of the 19th and the early morning hours of the 20th, when it gets even colder. There is a hard frost on the night of the 19th, and the soldiers talk about how miserable it is because of how cold it is. But some of that is going to be the fact that when they quit moving, when they try to bivouac, when they try to get some sleep, they have soaked all of their clothing through with perspirations. There's no appreciable wind.
It's very still.
Very still.
The dust and the smoke tends to hang in the air and create dense clouds, so nothing's blowing it away.
The temperature could have been 10 degrees, it could have been in the 70s, or it might have even been in only the upper 50s. But if you're moving around enough to soak your clothing through,
they also drop their packs and bedrolls,
right? Yeah.
So that when they go into action, they're here.
Although for Johnson's division, most of them have not yet done it back here.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Right.
So when they initially form up, most of them still have their knapsacks on their back and or their blanket roll, and won't drop them until they start going out that way. However, Brannan's division and some of Baird's division, which had been in this field earlier, there are lots of piles of knapsacks in that field already. And with piles of knapsacks and their supposed guards, ambulances, ordnance wagons, artillery caissons, battery wagons and traveling forges, all of this stuff from Brannan and Baird's division that would have been in this field. That's probably why Johnson deploys his division in the woods on the other side of the road. He doesn't want to try to deploy in the middle of this mess that's out here in the fields. Anything else you want to add here? All right. So the division has deployed. Willich is on the right front. Baldwin is on the left front. Each of them are deployed, 2 regiments up, 2 regiments back. Their artillery batteries have been tasked to try to follow as best they can. And Dodge's brigade is in support, and the whole division is going to step off and move out towards the sound of the action. They deploy skirmishers in the front. Some will deploy skirmishers to the left and right as well, but they're moving out towards the sound of the action. And that's what we're going to emulate. I actually did scout the possibility of walking some relative exact alignment, but particularly now that we've had some rain, I think we're going to stick with the trail, because to walk the exact alignment, we'd have to cross a couple of drainages, which might be running pretty good by this time. So we're going to walk down here and take the trail behind the Texas monument.
I did, Patrick. Yeah. I saw you all day yesterday. It was like there's a couple people I saw all day yesterday and never got a chance to say hi to.
Right in front of the pedal, but so is he one of these relic hunters, or is he kind of independently doing this on his own? Yeah, no, he does. He hasn't relic hunted for years. He was doing this back when he was growing up in the town, Chickamauga in the 70s.
You know, for 2 days, I guess it's the whole thing to put this thing in perspective, and just to 18 and habitat and
And that's because he had the nerve damage and he kind of feel it.
I mean, they've got plenty of stuff.
Those 14-yard long vehicles down through the trees. Now, Peter Simonson, who is the captain of the 5th Indiana Battery, which is the battery attached to Willich's brigade, and as senior artillery captain in the division, is the chief of artillery of Johnson's 2nd Division, but he is not serving on September the 18th, 19th, 20th as Division Chief of Artillery because of August Willich, the commander of the 1st Brigade. Willich wanted to command his own battery. Did not want his battery, Goodspeed's Battery A, 1st Ohio Light Artillery, to be under the command of Peter Simonson. And several days before the battle, as they're coming over Lookout Mountain, Willich had gone to Johnson and had asked to have authority over his own battery, and Johnson had approved that, and so this kind of left. Well, that would have left Simonson just commanding, theoretically, the other 2 batteries in the division. But I kind of the way he writes it, you might read that he's piqued a little bit by this, and he just goes back to being battery commander. And so Johnson's division is going to fight the battle really without a division chief of artillery. No real detriment to that, but Simonson, probably from knowledge gained by the experience of Baird and Brannan, Simonson left his caissons back there on the Lafayette Road and only brought the gun teams, the gun limber, and the guns into the woods. So he doesn't have 12 14-yard multi-jointed vehicles to navigate down through the trees. He's only got 6. So that they are starting to learn that this is not good ground for artillery. And so you start seeing artillery batteries respond differently to the where the fighting is occurring. So.
But now they have to come up with.
I'm sorry?
How did they resupply that?
Well, if they would have then sent the caissons forward if they needed them, but rather than struggle with them initially, they just left them.
Once they establish the position.
I'm sorry. No, the density of the forest today is much greater than it was in 1863. However, right here where we are, at least for the last couple of decades, the hardwood forest right here where we're standing right now has been relatively healthy. And in particular, you're not getting much Chinese privet in here. And so this, right now in the wintertime with the leaves off the trees, you do have greater visibility down through the woods than you normally do. But you could see 150 or 200 yards down through the woods because of the open range grazing and the effects of fire. And that kind of visibility down through the woods would make it easier for the artillery to try to keep up with the infantry. So I paused here to let our column close up, but then also to explain just a little bit. We walked into the woods behind the Texas Monument. We went down a slight grade, cross wet weather drainage on the trail there, up over a rise where the Deschler shell pyramid stood that we walked by, and then we turned kind of southeastward onto this trail. We went down a short distance, and it is true that in general on this battlefield, the ground from the Lafayette Road to the east to the creek, that the ground stair steps down ever lower to the east. But one of the things that is unique about this particular position and unique for Johnson's division is right out in to the east of that crest we came over where the Deschler shell pyramid was, there is a big flat area. And that's what we're walking across right now. And several of the officers note that in their reports, that they move across this big flat to where the ground is then going to drop off again, and we'll see that ahead of us. The other thing is that this trail that we are walking goes to the southeast. And so as we have been walking, as we started out there on Battle Line Road at the Texas Monument, we would have been in Baldwin's sector. Let's see here. How can I illustrate this? I'm going to draft you. Thank you. So facing, let's see here. East is going to be.
You on compass?
Well, potentially, but now put your arms out. So you're the brigade. You're advancing like this, but we have been walking across the front of it, and so we have now walked. I got him facing due. Yeah, I got him about right. So. Yeah. Don't have the sun today to help me. So. But we have been kind of walking across Baldwin's brigade front, and now we're going to walk into Willich's brigade front over here. So we're kind of going across the front. They, of course, were just moving due east through the woods.
Jim, one question. You talked about Simonson being the at least nominal artillery commander for this division. Other than Mendenhall and being able to assemble the guns in Dyer on the 20th, did anyone else in the Army of the Cumberland have any real substantive authority to collect artillery at a point, or was it just kind of catch as catch can?
Well, theoretically, each division, the senior captain, the senior battery captain in the division is the division chief of artillery, and there are several instances where the division chief of artillery is directing the action of the batteries within the division, but they're still pretty much attached to that brigade.
I think one of the things you notice is that each division here fights their artillery just a little bit differently. My favorite example is James Negley's division, where all of the batteries seem to engage in half batteries. A battery of 6 guns would have 3 sections, 2 guns, 2 guns, 2 guns. But in Negley's division, they fight 3 guns, 3 guns, half batteries. Don't know why, no one has explained it. It's some informal tactical doctrine that they've come up with. Some of the divisions treat their artillery chiefs as purely administrative. I assume that's because they're like Willich. The brigade commanders want to control that tactical asset. Others do seem to have a battlefield authority, but you can't apply a blanket statement. We go forward another year, and it's much more common for the division artillery chief to be controlling his division's artillery in action, not just administratively. But everything here is just a little bit different, division by division.
So there's no Henry Hunt figure?
No.
Yeah, they haven't gotten rid of the battalion organization really.
Well, in theory, they have a battalion organization.
But not in practice.
But they're not employing it tactically. They all are administratively artillery battalions.
But isn't Hunt really only the commander of the reserve artillery?
Yes.
And not the divisional. He has no authority over the divisional artillery.
You have to ask Lincoln Hancock about that. But I mean, in theory, there's no Henry
Well,
Hunt.
technically, he's Army Chief of Artillery. There is a is it Tyler? Who's the commander of the 5 Brigade Artillery Reserve as well. But Hunt, the same sort of struggle is going on there. Having his argument, the infantry commanders, I'm not going to take away my cannons, and the artillery officers really want to be able to mass and convert fires the way they've been trained now, the way they've been taught, and so that dynamic is there too. It's just that Hunt does have greater authority given to him by Hooker.
Well, by the overland campaign, they've got all the battalions by corps, really, not even by division.
Right. As a matter of fact, the artillery of the evolution of the artillery brigades or battalions is going to drift upwards in terms of where it's being commanded by.
So as we go forward from here, as we go down this trail, we'll be basically continuing kind of southeast, but think about the Union line going off to your right front just a little bit as it advances, and we're going to move down fully into Willich positions. No. It probably would have been one of the batteries of Cheatham's division. Correct. Years that I've been seeing, the trails mismanaged here. Periodically, a place gets really bad, and they just bring dump truckload after dump truckload of crush and run in and dump into the trail. They don't address the drainage problem. And so then over time, the water just washes the crush and run away, or it just creates a new depression somewhere. Well, when I first worked here in 1982, Trail Patrol, when I was in the law enforcement division at the time, Trail Patrol was that we took our patrol cars, which had bubblegum machines on top of them, 2 bubblegum machines on a bar on the top of them, even our patrol truck, which was outfitted the same way, and we drove the trails. The trails were wide enough you could drive on them because they wanted to be able to get the full-size dump truck and our big loader down through them to do trail work. And so Trail Patrol was, you just drove the patrol car on the trail. So they don't address the drainage problem. That's what has caused this. So okay, so I've gotten on to one of my favorite subjects, which was the mismanagement of the National Military Park. So we've stopped here at the Willich tablet, and I mainly want right now from this point. If you look down the little trail right over there, if you move around just a little bit, you can see a medium gray Ohio intermediate position marker for the 1st Ohio, the right front regiment of Baldwin's brigade. And so the right of Baldwin's brigade is theoretically somewhere just in this area that you're looking towards, and that marker represents some part of the 1st Ohio's line, maybe the center, but then if you start pacing things off, maybe it's not the center exactly, but Baldwin is over there. Willich begins somewhere in this area and is over here. And we're going to walk back to Willich's left front regiment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, typically these things represent.
Yeah, I have seen that market.
I found 49. They're little obelisks that would.
Maybe when he was there, he's been, he's been.
Walked to the marker for the 49th Ohio, the left front regiment of Willich's brigade. When the veterans organized to create the National Military Park, when they get Congress to pass the act creating the National Military Park, the act authorizes the states that had troops in the campaign for Chattanooga to erect monuments on the National Military Park. The national, or the commission that is created to oversee the National Military Park is not authorized to erect monuments on the battlefield, except to the United States regular units. The states that had troops are authorized to erect monuments. And most states did. Southern states have a more difficult time doing that. Even in the late 1880s, early 1890s, the economic effects of the war are still very great. And so typically here, Confederate monuments or markers are fewer and smaller and less grandiose. But they are here. We'll see at least a couple of, we should see some Georgia and Tennessee ones in just a few minutes here. the state of Ohio created a commemoration pattern or scheme where each regiment or battery would have one large monument, and then and the monuments, and that monument would be erected on the battle line where the regiment did its best fighting. Now define for me best fighting. But the monument would be placed on the battle line where the regiment did its best fighting. But recognizing that most units were engaged in multiple places, the state of Ohio also said we will erect smaller markers to mark intermediate positions or other positions. And the state of Ohio intermediate position markers look like this. And some regiments have 2 or 3 of these at different places on the battlefield. The state of Indiana has intermediate position markers. We'll see one of those, or a couple of those on this walk as well. Not all states did that. So the schemes, the monumentation schemes really vary here. So this is a Ohio intermediate position marker. Yes, ma'am.
Could the states invest in them now?
Well, okay, so could the states invest in them now? Another provision of the act was that once the states erected the monuments markers, they would then turn them over to the Park Commission. And in the dedication ceremonies, there are formal transfers of ownership of the monuments and markers to the Park Commission. Most states have subsequently then said, well, you're now responsible for them, so you have to do something with them. However, there have been a few states, most recently Texas, which did take some responsibility for their monument. Now, we walk past the Texas monument over here, but Texas did not get around to erecting any of their Civil War battlefield monuments until the 1960s. And so almost all of the Texas monuments look exactly like the one that we just walked past. In the late 90s, early 2000s, Texas had a governor who had a friend who is a huge history buff, huge history buff, and very well-to-do businessman, although at this particular moment not quite as well-to-do as he once was, but because Bud Light's not selling as well right now. So he asked his governor friend, won't you appoint me to the head of the Texas Historical Commission? And the Texas governor did. And the huge history buff friend, particularly the Civil War, he was aware that some of the Texas monuments needed some attention, and so he went to his governor friend and said, let's get the legislature to authorize the expenditure of state funds outside the boundary of the state to care for our monuments. And the governor said, good, and they did. And the Texas monument here was long missing the star, and it was replaced under that effort. There are some other things, I won't get into them at this point. Subsequently, that history-interested individual, his friend got elected president, and so the history-interested individual went to his friend, now president, and said, won't you appoint me to be the head of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which is the highest federal preservation thing? And the governor, or the president said, yes, I will. And for 8 years, he was. So, but Texas was the most recent to do that. Anybody know the president?
George W.
George W. Yeah.
when they deployed way back there. They got here in line abreast.
Well, okay, so that's part of what we want to do right here.
I was just asking, how
okay.
in the world could they do that?
Well, remember, the trees were more widely spaced. You could see 150, 200 yards down through the woods.
This is an example of what it wasn't like. This is a very dense,
this is only
close
50 or
thicket
75
that
yards here.
So,
With that.
so let's see. I'm going to have you all kind of stay right about where you are. Some of you all might want to move around a little bit so that you're facing them. So I am making each one of these individuals a company within our regiment. Okay?
Post of honor, also known as the target.
All right. So the companies are identified by letters, A, B, C, D. There's no J, because J was the last letter added to our alphabet in the original form of the J. It looked very much like the I, and out of desire to not have confusion, and also to honor tradition, because there were company I's before there was a J. There is no J in this. But that's not how the companies were lined up.
Right.
And so, for all of my company people, look at the bottom of the chart, and now get in line correctly. So you are the right.
I'm staying here.
Which is not inappropriate.
Oh, you're the color guard. I'm away from the color guard. I'm on
No.
Come on. I'll grab that flag. You're over here.
This is the right. This is the left.
H goes right here.
This is the right.
Who's G? You're G, you're over here. You're right here. No, other way around.
Somewhere around.
You're the other way. Yeah. Looking at it this way.
No, G is here.
Excuse me, on the piece.
I'm still playing.
Okay, something's not quite right. Okay, H, you need to be on the other side. There we go.
They read it differently. So if you look at it this way, that's where it is.
Thanks to Bjorn. I know the form.
Okay, so now our company, our battalion, our regiment is finally in the right company order.
No, it's not.
It's not?
No, if she's H and she's on this side of the color guard,
Yep.
okay. I'm
Right, right.
Okay, you sent me down
No,
here.
no, you're in the right place now. The
Look
right
at-
of our regiment is there.
Tactical issue.
Yeah, that's what's confusing.
So you're the first company to
Based on the rank of the captain.
so right of the
If
regiment.
you'd done it half pages, but
And the left of the regiment is right here. So, yep, you're in the right place now.
Hold it like that and read it to the back.
Well, thank you for that tip.
Okay. So, how did the regiment get lined up this way? And we, okay, seniority initially is what defines this. Theoretically, the senior captain in the regiment commands Company A. The second senior captain commands Company B. And then Company C and on down in seniority, except Civil War regiments were raised in local communities, typically counties or towns. And this reassignment of officers based on seniority is something that is not acceptable to people from these local communities, because now somebody from a rival town or county might be more senior. They're not going to want to command that company. So this all complicates this, but this is the standard order for a regiment.
And in theory, there's a very good reason for that. There's a colonel, lieutenant colonel, and a major who are supposed to command the whole regiment. What happens if all three of those men are either absent or killed or wounded? Senior captain takes over. So if the lieutenant colonel is over here and the regiment is in combat and he goes down,
Number 3 in command.
yeah, Captain A. But what if A and B and C are right together, the first three ranking captains, and they're flanked and hit hard? All three of your senior captains also go down. So this is why it's mixed up, or at least in theory why it's mixed up.
Yeah, and the regular units are doing it this way. They're doing it strictly by seniority, and that's one of the challenges. When you look at the organization of the regular brigade of the Army of the Cumberland at Stones River, and you look at it here, it is night and day different. Basically, the only thing that is the same is the regiments in the brigade. The officers have switched all over the place because they are moving by seniority. So where is the senior first lieutenant in the regiment? Yep, Company A. Where is the junior second lieutenant in the regiment? In K. If we were doing it the regular brigade or the regular Army way. But they're not doing that in the volunteer Army. And one of the things, and I spend a lot of time, even for this program today, I have spent a lot of time trying to figure out the company alignment of the regiments of Johnson's division. For a couple of them, I'm pretty certain they're using the standard alignment. But for all of the rest of them, I don't know. In the first Ohio, Bassett Langdon, the commander of the battalion, says his left and right companies are B and G. But he does not indicate whether B is on the left of the line or on the right of the line. And there are occasional other references which suggest that, and we'll actually do one of them in just a minute, that that many regiments are doing other alignments.
Who rode horses? What level of officers?
Only the field grade officers, so major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel and higher have horses. In Bragg's army, because of heavy casualties to regimental officers at Perryville and Stones River, Bragg in the spring of 1863 issued a general order that said that you had to be brigade staff and brigade command and higher to be mounted. And regimental commanders had to go in on foot. Now there are some violations of that general order here in the battle, but by and large, Bragg's regimental commanders are going in on foot to reduce the casualties.
Would you have had file closers?
Yes, you would have had file closers. The men would have been formed in two ranks, and then the sergeants and lieutenants would have been in a line behind, spaced out behind, and there's a particular order of how they are spaced. And they would have been 3 paces behind the rear rank. Their purpose is both to keep the men in ranks and to guide the formation. We could do a whole day just on this and the most basic movement. And I'm not even talking about teaching you to actually do the moves. I'm just talking about all the little variations. The Union Army is using, by this time, since in the fall of in the late summer of 1862, the Union Army adopted Casey's Tactics as their tactical manual. Not replacing Hardee's tactics, replacing Scott's tactics. Hardee's actually is kind of a sideshow, but that's a whole other subject. But Casey's Tactics was published in 3 little volumes like this. This is one that was owned by a fellow who was here, who was a first sergeant in one of the companies of the 24th Wisconsin, and he already had applied to become an officer in one of the 2 United States Colored Troops regiments that Rosecrans is organizing, and will be in October get his orders to go be a company commander in the 13th what becomes the 13th United States Colored Troops. And at some point after that assignment, he bought a set of Casey's, and this is his volume 1 of that set. Actually, I should have opened that up. So look at the little type and the little diagrams in here. Okay, yes, I know I'm moving pretty fast and you're not really able to look at it, and your old eyes are having a little difficulty getting focused on the page and the little type. You know, so if you if you actually wanted to read Casey's tactics in the original volume like this, the majority of us would probably be reaching for our magnifying glasses, wouldn't we? Yeah.
So this is what they drilled at when they went.
Yes, this is what they drilled at all the time, hours a day. So when Crazy Bob Younger, or Sweet Old Bob, decided to reprint Casey's tactics, he put it in one volume in a larger size, so that us with old eyes can read it more easily. But this is Casey's tactics. Try to read it and understand it.
There will be a quiz.
There were. If you were a captain or a lieutenant, you're going to be quizzed on knowing this. If you're a colonel, you're going to be quizzed on knowing this.
Yeah, but you get
And this field was the final exam.
In a lot of ways, this field is the final exam. Okay, so but this is the basic formation, and in Casey's tactics, the regiments in the front of the brigade, so 2 regiments up, the 2 front regiments are deployed in line of battle. That's what we have here. And one of the reasons why I obsess on trying to figure out what is the actual company order within a regiment is that this could be 200 yards across the front. And particularly in a battle like this, your experience could be very different from the experience down there. And so when you find an account from somebody and they're describing something, might it matter where they were on the line? And so I try to figure that out, and only rarely can I figure that out.
Just as an example, probably the most extreme example of that is probably the 21st Ohio on Horseshoe Ridge, which is spread across, ultimately down in a single rank across a couple of 100 yards. It's a very wide front. And when we've done tours there, we've had that same discussion, and their experience is very different.
Yeah.
In their tactics, would there have been an optimum front that a company should
Well, a company should have been 100 men, but most of these companies are only in the 30s because of previous battle casualties, sickness, illness, details, all kinds of different things. And so a company front would basically be 14 or 15 men across the front, 2 ranks, and then with the file closers behind. And I always use 2 feet per man. And so 15 men across the front would be 30 feet. That's 10 yards. So a company would be basically between 2 10-yard lines on a football field.
This bunch of people would be a pretty good count. This is a pretty good sized count.
Yeah, has anybody counted the folks here for me yet? So,
I don't know, but we just got a mascot.
The regiment then would be 10 companies. and so about 100 yards across the front for a regiment. But there are some variables to that depending upon where you put your corporals and
How far back would have been the next two regiments?
They're using Casey's tactics. 2 regiments in line of battle up front. The other 2 regiments are back behind, the distance to them is going to vary, primarily based on the ground and the battle situation. You want to have them back far enough that they have room enough to maneuver up onto the front line. You also want to have them where they are somewhat protected from the fire before they become engaged, because being back there, they can't actually shoot.
But they can still get hit.
But they can still get hit, potentially, if they're too close. And so the distance to the 2 regiments behind is going to vary. Now, in Casey's tactics, there are some formal declarations about what those distances should be, but it also says it is to vary with the circumstances. And here, and specifically, well, this is Willich's brigade, so the 49th Ohio is here. His original regiment, the 32nd Indiana, is on the right. The 15th Ohio is behind the 49th Ohio, and the 89th Illinois is behind the 32nd Indiana. Here, both of those regiments are actually close enough that they are going to get fire, and they are not sheltered from overshots aimed at the front line. Now, what did I say when we first stopped? We were walking across a flat out in front of that hill, and then what did we do? We dropped down. And I didn't pause, but there was a little short trail that went off, and then there was the marker down there like this for Battery A, 1st Ohio Light Artillery. And Goodspeed's battery, the brigade's battery. And that was on the edge of that ground dropping down. Guess where the 15th Ohio and the 89th Illinois are located? In front of the battery and on that slope going down. And so they are actually laying downhill with the battle line in front of them in lower ground, and all Civil War soldiers have a tendency to shoot high. And so what's going over the heads of the 49th Ohio guys here and impacting the 15th and 89th, 15th Ohio and 89th Illinois on that slope. And Goodspeed then is firing over the heads of all of these regiments. Goodspeed is on a 86-yard front. His 6 guns spread out. Actually, here probably a little bit more because of the wooded terrain. But the 15th Ohio and the 89th Illinois are not in line of battle. They are in what's called column of division. On center, closed in mass. What does that mean? So, okay, I need my battle line to step up here equal to, or onto the monument here, so I've got enough room. Now, as Dave said, you've got to have some intervals between units for deploying purposes to have enough room to maneuver. But there is also a closed-in mass formation or half-distance formation, and that's basically to retain command and control. The moving a line of battle is difficult. It takes time. It can't move real fast because maybe the left will get out in front a little bit and the right hang back. And so to move the unit more efficiently, they are in column of division, which is pairs of companies. And this can be formed in different ways, on the right or on the left, but mostly on the center. So how did you form column of division on center, closed in mass? And the commands literally would be to do that, and the lieutenant colonel on the right of the regiment would command the right of the regiment to left face, except for companies C and H. So you all are going to stand back. So you all are going to left face. The major would command the left of the regiment, E, K, G, and B, to right face. And then on the command march, Company E is going to turn slightly to the right, march forward until they are behind Company H, and then face to the front. Company D, or Company I, is going to march to the slightly to the left and then behind. The others are going to follow behind.
Company C, show some pride.
Fire coming right in here.
Company F, you come in here behind D.
We're only too wide.
And in
Now
case
you're
you need
only
a
two
target for
companies
everybody.
wide. If the colors are still in the center.
You should be ahead of us.
Behind Tom is to take his place.
And now, if and in fact, as happens, when Willich advances from here, and Dodge's brigade is moved from reserve, Dodge is going to be sent to the right, as we're going to see. And as that happens, Willich realizes that the brigade front, or the area to be covered by the brigade front, has increased. And so he's going to order the 89th Illinois to move up on line to the right of the 32nd Indiana. And they're going to be in this formation, which is going to facilitate their rapid movement to the area where they need to deploy. And this column's actually then going to angle off to the right until they are at about the right space beyond the right of the 32nd Indiana. And then the command forward into line is going to be given. And there'll be some other commands within the column. Here, you do this side and I'll do this side. So forward into line, E comes back up on line to H, K comes back up to E, G comes back up to the left of K, and B up to the left of G. So now you're back.
How wide is the company front?
You're in company front.
I understand that, but how many people would it meet?
Well, that would 15. So
15 or
yeah,
so,
yeah.
same in column?
Yeah, same in column. Yep.
So you kind of
Each-
do a half wheel.
Each company would be in line of battle.
Only you do it a lot.
Does this happen simultaneously or does?
No, it would be simultaneously.
Okay, I didn't know. Okay, so this guy doesn't go. Okay.
Yeah,
So you
and,
have to kind of judge about.
correct.
All right.
And that's
seconds, not minutes.
right. And that's the purpose of the guides, the sergeants and lieutenants in the file closer line. And then they would be practiced at the left guide of Company K. Would look and say, okay, I'm going to need to be about there, and he would then help guide them over into that line. So, well, when they were marching to arrive here, they would be marching in what officially is called march by the flank. It'd be a column of 4. Technically, it's a column of 5 because there's a line of file closers outside of it, but a column of 4 men. But once they know they're about to go into combat, they're going to start deploying in the line of battle, whether they're in company column or column by division or in battalion lines. So imagine all of this happening in the woods here. In this case, the 89th Illinois is going up onto the right of the 32nd Indiana.
So Willich did the advance by fire thing, right?
Yes,
And that's a different deployment though, isn't it?
it is. But it's still at this level, the company level, it's still the same.
It's based on this strike.
Right.
But it's like 3 ranks instead of 2?
It's 4 ranks. Yeah, with an interval between the men. So, but each company it still would have had the same company front of about 10 yards, but it would have been 4 ranks deep plus the line of file closers. So, yes.
Well, the Army of the Potomac didn't seem to use Casey's tactics that much. Why did the
Army of the Cumberland?
No, the
Or,
Potomac.
right, no.
Why did the Cumberland use it? And how about the Army of Tennessee? How did the Army of Cumberland come to use it so much? And
Well, it's published in August of 1862. So who is then commanding what would become the Army of the Cumberland? Don Carlos Buell. And Buell, he's another person we love to criticize and castigate. But Buell sees the directive come from the War Department to use Casey's tactics, and he says, "Yes, sir." And they begin using it in the fall of 1862, while Buell was still in command. And there are a few brigades at Perryville which are in Casey's formation.
Yeah, he issues an order which is in the official records that specifies its use. There's not a similar official order from the Army of the Potomac that I've ever seen. Or the Army.
did they use Casey's or?
Well, by 64, the Army of Tennessee units that I've looked at most are using Casey's. But they also seem to be kind of making it up as they go along.
Open order. The Army of the Tennessee is the most flexible, shall we say.
Yeah.
The Army of the Potomac, a lot of the brigades in the Army of the Potomac go into action in single lines, even in 1864. I don't know why. That's what they trained and what they were comfortable with. They've had a lot more commanders, and maybe that had something to do with it, because an Army commander puts his stamp on an army if he knows what he's doing, if he's a capable commander.
But at a certain point, they were experienced with Hardy's tactics, so.
No. They're familiar with an earlier set of tactics.
Yeah.
We'll just say that.
So why change? They probably just
Well,
wanted to keep it.
there are multiple reasons. One of which is the high casualty rates, because one of the things that Casey's is supposed to do is speed up even more the movement from one formation to another formation. And in fact, and this is one of the things about Willich in particular, once he comes back to command of his brigade in May of 1863, after having been exchanged from having been captured at Stones River in December, he begins to practice his brigade so that all commands are by bugle, and there are bugle calls for each one of these change of formation. But he wants the brigade to be able to fully function only on the bugle, not having officers yell this or that, but just have the bugle calls made. In fact, he begins using bugles so extensively that the brigade begins to variously be called the Horn Brigade, or Willich's Horn Brigade, or the Bugle Horn Brigade. And in fact, in the tent case in the exhibit area in the visitor center, we have a Willich Brigade bugle that has a specific history to Missionary Ridge. He also, and this is also Army-wide, Rosecrans really wants this. He wants them to do all of these changes in formation on the run. That run is faster than the 165 steps a minute, which is double quick. And they literally practice it on the run. So this is, but think about this. Lots of you all are football fans. And some of you all probably have been to practices where they would let you in, and what do you see them doing? Running the same play over and over and over and over and over again to build that muscle memory, and that's what these guys are doing too. So
I want to say a little quick word about Willich, because he's a kind of a unique individual. First of all, if you've read about Civil War and for many years people would say, well, Clausewitz was an important influence on the change of warfare. And then people, the historians started to push back and say, well, Clausewitz wasn't really published in English until after the Civil War, and Civil War soldiers were not exposed to Clausewitz. They were exposed to Jomini, the previous Napoleonic War theorist, who was widely published and widely studied. All of that is completely true. The exception are the Germans, who went to Kriegsacademies in Germany. And August Willich didn't just go to a Kriegsacademy in Germany, he went to the Berlin Kriegsacademy, where Karl von Clausewitz was an instructor and later the head of the college until he dies in 1829, I think, of cholera, 29 or 31, in a cholera outbreak. So August Willich is thoroughly familiar with Clausewitz's theories of warfare. He's a professional soldier in Germany until he becomes infected with communism. And he is
Even we can say radical communism.
Yeah. Regular old communism is not sufficient for August.
Not that living room communism.
Marx isn't Marxist enough for this guy.
I like to joke that he is so communist that he once challenged Karl Marx to a duel for not being communist enough. Yeah. It's a little more complicated than that. But
The Marine Corps, the School of Advanced Warfighting, still read Dead Carl, they called him, but
yes,
he's still studying.
oh yeah.
Even to this day.
So he comes from kind of a different military school, and August Willich is also, I think, one of the most capable brigade commanders in the Army of the Cumberland. He's a thinking officer. The 15th Ohio Regimental History, when they talk about drills and training sessions with Willich, instead of just going out and performing rote maneuvers, Willich sets up little tactical scenarios, explains what they're supposed to be doing. He makes it all perfectly understandable. They sing his praises for that. The Bugle Brigade, the Horn Brigade, which occasionally there's an instance at Pickett's Mill in 1864, where one of the National Tribune articles of a soldier who fought at Pickett's Mill says, "Those damned bugles." That's his title, because they, as the division is maneuvering through the woods prior to that battle, the Willich Brigade is still sounding the bugles, and they're supposed to be creeping up looking for this flank, and all these bugles are blowing. In actual fact, I think, Brad, you'd probably agree, there's enough stuff going on that everybody knows.
Paper news there.
Yeah, they're not giving anything away. But the other interesting thing about Willich's brigade is something that Sam just mentioned. It's called advanced firing. Willich, after Stones River, he's starting to think about oh yes, and he has a pet raccoon.
And I'll circle it here, but look what's hanging on his tent pole. A bugle.
How did he get here? I mean, how did
He's a revolutionary.
He's a 1848 liberal revolutionary in the Germanic states, and that revolution fails, and he flees for his life and comes to the United States.
It reveals his whole German.
Well, when the war begins, they need officers. He's a prominent German in Madison, Indiana, and so he can bring German troops to the Indiana war effort. So he gets made colonel of the 32nd Indiana.
The orders were usually issued in German.
In addition to his education, even after he came to the United States after the failed 1848 revolutions, he remained very much in touch with what was going on in Europe. And so the advancements in military art and science in the late 1840s and then the 1850s, the Crimean War, even probably more so than anybody in the United States, Willich is keeping up with it. And one of the reasons is he can do what? He can read German. and I think French.
Yes.
And so he's much more easily being able to learn about all of these other theories and thoughts. And we are way behind in 1861. We are way behind. So us arrogant Usonians, navel-gazing Usonians, forget that in the mid-19th century, we weren't nothing, and we were taking our cues from Europe. So, and Willich has an inside way to know these advancements. And eventually, what is Willich told to do? Cease and desist all of this, and just do Casey's tactics. But he is a real interesting character, and it really allows you to ask some of these questions about the state of military art and science. But so this is taking longer than I had thought. But you know, understanding how this deployment here is literally laid on the ground can be really important. Here, and even their skirmishers earlier, here, Willich and Baldwin have made contact with Confederates, and they're pushing those Confederates back. But as they do, Confederate resistance ahead of them stiffens. Over to the south of us is Brock Field, and in Brock Field, Palmer's left, Hazen's brigade has been engaged for some time now, and they're beginning to having some disorganization by having taken casualties. They're running short on ammunition, as Johnson is advancing, the request comes to Johnson to support Palmer's left, Hazen's brigade, and Dodge's brigade of 4 regiments, 2 up and 2 back, but all 4 of them in column on center by division. They are going to be marched off to the south to move towards Hazen to relieve Hazen's brigade. As that begins, Willich and Baldwin are going to give the order to charge. Not just advance, charge. And they are going to advance forward from this position. So.
Well, now, on the map you show here, it shows this would be a Confederate group here?
Yeah, yeah. I had to do the maps in black and white, because
Right.
the color was staggeringly
The
expensive.
thing is that they're pushing in,
Confederates are that way and that way.
but so the Union doesn't have a line, a full line across.
No,
The reason Dodge is moving south is to extend that line and create that full line.
to fill the space between Johnson here and Palmer there, and relieve Hazen's brigade.
They're starting to run out of people.
Yes. All right. So we need to attack the Confederates in our front.
Guys into battle as they come in.
And I would say he's probably thinking twice as fast as my cousin.
He does everything very deliberately, too.
Yes. Yeah. That guy. It just absolutely. These are the Confederates that Willich here. Willich here, and to our right and Baldwin to our left. These are the Confederates that they're going to be attacking. This is a tablet for Claiborne's division on the night of the 19th, the early morning hours of the 20th. But the guns for Scoggins Georgia Battery, and there's a Georgia marker there, and there's a Tennessee marker there if you want to compare monuments. But we are now on the line of Jackson's brigade of Cheatham's division, the right front of Cheatham's division. And they are going to be struck by Willich's and Baldwin's attack, going to be begun to be pushed back. Now Willich and Baldwin make their success seem to happen almost immediately and instantly. But there's actually a little more time involved in it than most of their accounts.
Yeah, they're both, well, Baldwin doesn't get to write a brigade report.
Right.
But Willich's brigade report is, yeah, we charge, things worked out great.
Yeah. But this is the line that they are initially striking. So I guess we'll go down here next. So
yeah.
When do you want to bring Maney on?
10:30.
Yeah.
Do you want to go down and do Dodge and then come back here and do Maine? Because we may not be able to get all the way up to do anything with Baldwin.
Yeah, let's go down and so this is where the Confederate line is. We're going to walk across the Confederate line, and also the Union line is attached. We're going to bring down Cumberland. There are almost no units still using the drums. They've switched entirely to bugle.
Yeah.
Are they still common in camp?
I'm sorry.
Are they still common in camp?
Not on the campaign. There may be musicians who still are serving as drummers in camp, but
there's certainly the when they're dealing with deserters and they have formal formations, there's a lot of talk about the drumming there. There are drums around the three sides of the square. And the Federals, they're not shooting them. The Confederates are doing the shooting by then. But I haven't come across a reference to the drum in the tactical account yet.
Right.
Doesn't mean they weren't there, or at least in some units. There's an exception to every rule. Yes,
Dave, how many buglers in that would be in a regiment?
Well, there are some references that Willich's got a bugler per company. So,
because that's what if it's doing 100% by that, someone takes out
the bugler.
One.
Right.
Horn section.
Yeah.
And they adapted German bugle calls so that they could be distinctive on the battlefield. If you sound the standard call for retreat, not just your regiment knows that you're retreating, but everybody you're fighting and everybody around you goes, hey, they're retreating. So you get instances of deceptive bugle calls where the captain or the battery or regimental commander says, okay, sound this, and when that happens, we'll fall back. or different bugle calls like Willich wanted to use the calls that he learned in Germany.
Yeah, and yeah, it does become a problem. So, but even with the drums, you've got that problem too. So.
Yeah.
What percentage of his regiment was German?
The 32nd, very high. Where's Daryl?
Right behind you.
My Cincinnati.
Nearly 100% in the 32nd.
Yeah.
Mostly Indiana boys, a smattering of Ohio and some Tennesseans.
The 49th has some German?
I think they do.
I don't think 15th.
15th, I don't think does, unless you get that oddball second or third generation kind of guy.
And the 89th Illinois is called the Railroad Regiment. They're not an ethnic regiment. They're Midwestern, farm boys, and they're called the Railroad Regiment because so many of them enlisted from the various railroad companies, primarily the Illinois Central and Illinois. Like the 73rd Illinois, the Preacher Regiment, because it had nearly 100 Methodist clergy in it.
So on the first map and in Dave's handout, right near the center of the page, you can see Dodge's brigade. They had originally been formed 2 regiments up, 2 regiments back. On the center, closed in mass. But when the request came to Johnson for assistance for Hazen, Dodge's brigade is moved to the right about 400 yards, and then moved forward, and all 4 regiments will deploy on line to the formation that you see here. The 29th Indiana on the right, then to the left, the 77th Pennsylvania, the 79th Illinois, and the 30th Indiana. And they'll sweep over some of Hazen's men who have fallen back and are laying on the ground, and they're going to sweep forward through this area. Now we have reached the Brock Field area here on the north side of the Brotherton Road, the north end of the Brotherton Field. There were trees being cut, felled trees. The trees were probably being cut to provide saw logs for Jay's Mill, which is about a mile in that direction. Now this might have been part of the Brock's strategy to clear more ground to bring it under cultivation. But the fact that there is felled timber here, and mostly what they're talking about is the tops of trees, that is not the way that a farmer would clear additional land for field. They would girdle the tree, allow it to die, and then plant around it while it died and fell. In fact, Brock Field was full of standing dead trees, and so the fact that this is described as felled timber and treetops is indication that it is probably to fuel or to provide saw logs for the Jay's Mill just down the road. In the fighting here, particularly as the Confederates advance, mostly Maney's brigade, they talk about pushing the Federals back into their field fortifications, into their breastworks. They're not pushing them back into field fortifications. They're pushing Federals back into this felled timber, which the Federals are then using as cover to fight from behind. But Dodge's brigade is now coming forward on the right of Willich's brigade, and so now Johnson is deployed with all 3 brigades online. Dodge has got all 4 of his regiments online. Willich, as a result of the space between Dodge's left, the left of the 30th Indiana, and the right of the 32nd Indiana, Willich orders the 89th Illinois, the railroad regiment, to come out of its support position, deploy on line, and move into to that space. And soon on the far left of the division, that's going to happen with the 93rd Ohio going up on the left of the 5th Kentucky. And so Johnson, as he's making this advance, is getting more and more of his regiments deployed in a single line.
As they advance, they're also advancing in slightly divergent directions. They're trying to track on the battle. So Dodge is going to come south and really head sort of, if he's headed this way and Willich is headed this way, it's not a dramatic gap, but as they go forward, that gap does widen, and that will be part of the problem when they finally reach their extended point, their culminating point.
Yeah. Both Dodge and the 30th Indiana will get concerned about no troops immediately on their left. The 89th Illinois gets concerned about no troops immediately on their right. So they're kind of spreading out also as they go forward. So,
obviously, even though the woods were more open at the time, the woods are still an obstacle. And maneuvering through the woods, especially after combat is joined and the smoke gets thick, it gets progressively harder to see.
At this point, is Cheatham far north unit for the Confederates?
No.
So that kind of puts it through the middle.
Well, both sides are coming together. They're moving further north each time, and they're coming together. So, at one time, the Federals have the advantage on the northern flank, and another time the Confederates have the advantage, and so on and so forth. The battle is spreading south.
Now here, when they got here, Cheatham's guys already had been pretty hammered, hadn't they? I mean, Cheatham's people have been.
Three of Cheatham's brigades had been.
Yeah.
There are Cheatham advances. He has 5 brigades, so he's the largest division in the Confederate Army. He advances with 3 brigades forward and 2 brigades back. All of his brigades are in single line of regiment. They haven't gotten any orders to use Casey. him being on the wrong side.
Is this killed, wounded, and missing? Is that what that means?
Yes, yes.
So you kill the first number, wounded the second number, and missing the third?
Missing / captured, yeah.
Okay.
Many of those missing are also killed, but just unidentified.
Couldn't find it.
Right. Didn't have time to recover the body or could positively identify. You know, someone says, I saw him go down, but I don't know what happened to him. So to go back to Cheatham real quickly, because it will play in up here. Cheatham's 3 brigades and leading 3 brigades advance on a very wide front, all the way across what we've been walking, across this field, down the south end of this field, and all the way out to where Carnes Battery is, south of the road, out towards Brotherton Field, though not to Brotherton Field, in the woods, east of the Lafayette Road. So that's a mile or more of distance, and then his 2 support brigades will come up and eventually replace his leading brigades. Jackson, who's in the middle at first here? Smith. Wright, and then behind Maney and Straw.
Which, in this environment, which worked better, Casey's tactics or the Confederates being in
Casey's works better because it gives, even though the initial frontage is an advantage to the Confederates, the greater depth gives the Federals versatility to then react to the changes. Yeah.
Each brigade commander has much better control over his brigade. If you look at the map, if a brigade commander, if Baldwin is here between the 1st Ohio and 5th Kentucky and in front of the 6th Indiana and 93rd Ohio, he has just a few yards to go to communicate with any of the 4 brigade commanders. If you're here and things are happening down here, and you're the brigade commander, you move down to the 6th and 9th Tennessee, and then an attack hits the 1st 27th, you're potentially 400 or 500 yards from the scene of action.
Which in fact does happen with Maney and
Exactly.
Maney's brigade. He gets fixated on the left of the brigade, and
If you're Otho Strahl, your brigade is spread across pretty much all of Brock
So they don't know
Field.
what's happening on one side.
Right.
versus the other.
Control is much more difficult.
Right.
You do get firepower. Obviously, everybody in Maney's brigade can shoot at the enemy. Only half of Baldwin's brigade can shoot back. But it's more so than firepower is control in combat and being able to direct that fire.
Cheatham doesn't have you somebody behind him.
No, he's got 2 of his own brigades in support, and when they come forward and replace the shot-up brigades who fall back, he has no reserve.
What designate, I see on here the 24 Tennessee sharpshooters, why is it designated that way?
they recognized they needed well-trained skirmishers, men in open order out in front to find the enemy, hold the enemy back as long as possible, and so in 1862 the Confederates begin to create battalions whose duty is full-time skirmishing, and they are given extra training just in the skirmish drill, and there's supposed to be 1 for each brigade, and when the brigade deploys they are to be the skirmishers, and they're supposed to be very practiced at it, to be able to go out and find the enemy, and keep the enemy at bay as long as possible. So.
Sharpshooter sounds like a cool elite name.
Yes. And in keeping with that, they tend to be much smaller than infantry regiments. The 24th, I think, had 3 companies, and they're less than 100 men, one of the 80 men, something like that.
And not every brigade in Bragg's army had
No.
one.
The Army of Northern Virginia started to form them in the spring of 1863, but some are formally recognized, some are informally recognized, and some don't appear to exist at all. So again, we think of Civil War tactics as they're using outdated tactics with modern weapons. Civil War tactics are evolving, as they do in almost every war, but this war, 1870-71, the limited wars up through the Spanish-American War and then up through World War I, the pace of change in tactical innovation is accelerating. It gets to be fairly dramatic. So that if you could have a bird's eye view of a battlefield in 1862, a Fredericksburg or an Antietam or one of the big bloody battles, and then you looked at the Atlantic campaign in 1864, had that same bird's eye view, you wouldn't think you're looking at the same war necessarily.
You wouldn't. There would. Jim, part of the training always in the United States, there was very little actual fighting. So why would you change your tactics?
Well, you want to change your tactics, keep your tactics apace with changes in military art and science and technology, and so you want to be prepared for the next war. And the United States has typically been not well prepared for the next war. So.
How are those tactics driven by the proliferation starting of repeating rifles, more firepower?
Actually, the tactics are not going to change as a result of magazine arms, because they're going to be used in such small quantities that that nobody sees a real need to make the change. It's going to be the rise of the needle gun, and then the
Machine gun.
now before the machine, the next one in Europe.
The French chesspot.
Yeah, the chesspot,
and
then eventually the Mauser. It's going to be that. It's going to be the needle gun, the chesspot, and then the Mauser concept that really is going to drive the conversion to open formation.
But American officers know what's coming. When Emory Upton proposes a new tactical manual in 1866, it's all open order and is based on magazine-fed weapons.
Okay. Well, I think communication has a lot to do with it too.
Oh yeah.
The ability to communicate with people, not just have them within voice distance.
That's a 2 or 3 day program.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, in order to, it's not just about firepower, it's about controlling firepower and delivering it on the enemy. When you're still using voice commands and troops are getting more and more spread out, the Germans run into this problem in 1870. They're fighting by half companies, and they deploy into a very open order. And their idea is we'll have an open order forward line, they'll suppress the enemy with firepower, and then the rest of the battalion will be in close column and they'll punch through. And they find out very quickly in 1870 that the open order line just starts to absorb all of the support companies, and suddenly they have no way to control these very extended battalion lines. Because we don't have radios, it's also a social thing. This is why it's a 2 or 3 day discussion. Civil War, European NCOs of the mid 19th century aren't trained to be independent leaders and thinkers. They're not trained to be tacticians. They're trained to be disciplinarians and inspirational in the ranks. They do some of that work on the skirmish lines, but by and large, the British are still finding in 1916 that their individual leadership skills are lacking at the very lowest tactical levels. The further you spread out, the more you push command decision making down the ranks until you have corporals and lance corporals and privates making very important tactical decisions about assaulting positions or taking trenches.
That's what happened with the stormtroops in World War I. They trained them to think.
Well, they trained them to operate in firearm maneuver teams and pushed command quite lower.
As it is now, the big issue is command and control.
It always is.
It always seems to always be.
In 1863, in order to mass firepower and control firepower, you massed men.
Yeah.
As we're learning in Ukraine in 2022, now if you have a single battalion deployed in a 10-click space, that battalion is probably too dense.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably dispersed these days. I know some guys that are they're the Red Force team of the Future Combat gaming that they do up in Carlisle on a regular basis. And they're looking at warfare at 2030, 2040 time frame. And a lot of what people are starting to talk about is quote unquote the transparent battlefield. It's very hard to hide. It's very hard to disperse enough. If you move or fire, you're spotted. The Navy started to realize this with modern sensors really in the 90s and 2000s. It seems to be translating all the way down into the individual infantry fighting on the modern battlefield. So.
Well, you got some of that just from the missile. I fire a missile at you.
Yeah.
You pick up the missiles coming and you say,
well,
where's the silly question? Where did it come from?
Not to get too far off track, but that's why missile accuracy is so high. That's why we have Russian aircraft literally circling over the Caspian Sea, hundreds of miles away from the battlefront, and waiting for a call for fire missions and firing. And why Ukrainian fighters are literally hugging the Polish border, looking for an opportunity to race in and race out. The warfare is really in a state of flux.
Who had trenches on their bingo card? That's World War I again.
So this is history. This is also some of the value of the military using history to get future leaders to think about the future. But how might you see the future? But by looking at the past, and the past might be from a few minutes ago in Ukraine, but it even has aspects all the way back where? So right here on this ground. And what is one of the purposes of the National Military Park? Professional military study. It's in the legislation.
Coming in the pipeline.
Okay, so Rick Mannion's teaching the military history course for the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga ROTC program, and I take it that both of you all are in his class. And are you both? Let's see. What's the phrase for the 3s and 4s? Are you fully signed up in the ROTC program?
We're both contracted.
You're contracted. That's right. Yeah, you're both contracted. So okay. So they are on track to be officers.
All right.
Well, yeah. Or at least second lieutenants. There is a difference, as you will be reminded on a regular basis. So,
Okay, we've moved the troops to here. What happened?
well, the Dodge is going to continue off in that direction, and we're. Maybe, Dave, in the interest of time, we should use Brotherton Road and go to Dodge's advanced position.
That's a good idea.
And
It's already 11.
yeah. So Dodge is going to continue off in that direction. We're going to actually kind of go at an angle to get to Dodge. Well, not his forward position, but where the area where he falls back to. And on Willich's left. So let's do that. We'll use the road in the interest of time.
Well, if I wasn't familiar with
Some pianos on the start.
So notice the reliefs, guys. Oh, invaluable to interpretation of what happened here.
Yeah, the coach there, those
but also to kind of get where they really should be, because it didn't burn up everything on the forest floor. So now, like the privet over there that's 10 and 15 feet high, this fire isn't going to do anything at all to that privet. That privet just said for a few minutes, "Ooh, my feet are hot."
They cut it down,
and
start over.
Didn't do anything, and that's one of the we have treated the privet in some areas, and I would have thought that we would burn in those places where the privet resprouts are only this tall, where the fire can do something to it. So
The root, I kill privets. I dug with a backhoe, and it's a privet this big.
Yeah.
I dug with a backhoe 10 feet and bored holes and put brush killers to kill it. I mean, that's what it took.
So we have advanced. Let's see. Just to our left here is a small marker. That's an Indiana intermediate position marker. And that one is to the 30th Indiana. We walked past another one just down here to the 29th Indiana. That's the left and right of Dodge's brigade. And then the 77th Pennsylvania Monument we walked behind. We're here at the 79th Illinois Monument of Dodge's brigade. And the placement of the monuments here represents all four of the battalions or regiments on line, and in this advance that is pushing the Confederates back, and they actually push them back further to the east than where we are right now. If you go down the trail behind the Preston Smith Shell Monument, you'll go down there to Confederate battery positions, and that's where Jackson and Maney are being pushed back to, and that Confederate line formed by those couple of batteries taking position there, and the Confederate infantry falling back to and behind that line. That's what's going to stop Dodge's forward advance. In addition to his concern that there's nobody on his right beyond the 29th Indiana, and as Dave described, they are advancing on divergent lines, and a space is open between the left of the 30th Indiana and the right of Willich's brigade. But where they are going to stop is actually still a couple hundred yards to the east of where we are right now. Dodge will begin to begin to evaluate his situation and also begin to redeploy. Willich has the same concern. Not so much on his left; he's still in contact with Baldwin, who's gotten out to the Winfrey Field, but there is a space to his right beyond the right of the 89th Illinois. And Willich starts to wander around in that space, trying to figure out what's going on, where the troops, and he makes contact with Dodge, and out of that comes Dodge reforming into 2 battalions up, 2 regiments up, and 2 regiments back. The 79th Illinois will be on the left front, and the 77th Pennsylvania on the right front, and the 2 Indiana regiments in the second line. But with nobody on their right, is that a concern for Dodge and Willich? Yeah. And so Dodge actually refuses his line, or bends his line back, folds it back a little bit. And so Dodge's position after this attack, after he falls back and reorganizes, is going to be in this area with the 77th Pennsylvania on his right front, 79th Illinois on his left front, and the 2 Indiana regiments back in the second line.
How much ammunition does he have?
Well, they have had to resupply with ammunition. So.
Which is clear up on.
It's back there. The ordnance wagons are back in Kelly Field, and one company of the 29th or 30th Indiana is the Division Ordnance Train Guard, and they get turned into ammunition box carriers. And they carry the 98-pound packing boxes, 1,000 rounds of ammunition forward to the line. In fact, whatever that company is, I think it's Company I of either the 29th or 30th. Their only casualty in the battle is one of those men carrying packing boxes of ammunition forward who gets struck in the process of that. but they actually carry boxes of ammunition forward.
It's gonna be what, a mile and a half?
Yes. Yep.
It's not a backpacker, it's already in the truck.
Well, that account does not tell us how they might have modified that, but there are plenty of other instances in the Civil War where soldiers, recognizing the difficulty of carrying that 98-pound box, be glad it's not 69 caliber ammunition, because then it would be 110 pounds.
Right.
There are plenty of other accounts from the Civil War where men break the boxes open, dump about half of the content of the box into a knapsack or a shelter half or a blanket, and carry that half forward that way. Because carrying that 98-pound box with just the wooden strap handles on the side of it is not easy. So, if you want to have some experience doing that, let me know, and I'll between now and next March when we do this, I'll definitely get my reproduction ammunition packing box for 58 caliber ammunition repaired, and
you can haul it,
right,
my own hand.
because I have one that is weighted out to 98 pounds. It has lead in it, and I put it on a scale, and I put small lead ingots in that box until it weighed 98 pounds. Right now it needs some repair, because the Marine who carried it 3/4 of a mile up Snodgrass Hill set it down on the ground rapidly, and the box needs some repair. So,
Well, now, does that carry the mini ball and the powder?
that 98 pounds is the box, is the 68 pounds of it is the lead of the mini ball. That's the powder, that's the paper they're rolled up in, that's the paper that contains the tin, that's the twine that closes that paper of 10 together, that's the paper tube with the 12 percussion caps per 10 rounds, that's the tow or packing material to fill up any loose space in the box so there's not any jiggling. That's the whole thing, 98 pounds.
Did Johnson's other two brigade commanders, did they kind of defer to Willich? And he outranked them both, but did they kind of defer to him because they knew he had a lot more experience on this than they did? Or if Johnson wasn't around, did they kind of?
Well, we don't know about Baldwin because Baldwin's going to be gone. But Dodge, I don't know that that Dodge is really deferring to Willich, but he is certainly acquiescing in what Willich is suggesting, and I think it's exactly
a very specific example with Baldwin. When later in the day, when Baldwin is worried about troops coming past his flank, Willich suggests that he takes his two rear regiments. Remember, he's in Casey's formation, 2 up, 2 back. Take his 2 rear regiments, face them north, and attack into the flank of the Confederates that are moving past him. And Baldwin does exactly that, and it works very well. I think at the very least, the division command structure is pretty harmonious, and they're willing to listen to Willich. He's well respected.
Where was Johnson?
Johnson's, this is actually kind of a rare case because we have a number of soldier accounts that actually mention the division commander on the battlefield. And he's along the battle line by several of these accounts. Levi Wagner of the 1st Ohio is very specific about his position behind the right of the 1st Ohio in the afternoon when they're along the fence at Winfrey Field.
Which would put him right at the seam between Baldwin and Willich. So he's center, well, from his perspective, center left of his two leading brigades. Dodge is, of course, shifted further south.
and one of Dodge's staff officers, the Scott, he is sent to report to Johnson. He has to ride around a little bit to find him, but when he finds Johnson, Johnson's over behind Baldwin somewhere. But yeah, this is not. There are not very many division commanders that you get specific references to where they are, but we've got a couple from Johnson. And he seems to be keeping track of what's going on and making adjustments.
Wish I had that for long.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So do you believe he might have been concerned about Baldwin's flank?
He is at one point. Yes. Yeah. And late in the day, Thomas takes him and Baird back to show him the low rise of ground at the Kelly Field where they're going to fall back to.
He communicates with Thomas. He knows that Palmer is down there, but he also knows that Baird and Brannon have fallen back. So he's mostly worried about the north. He doesn't have cover on that flank, and Thomas is. That's how ultimately we get Baird's division to come forward, is that Thomas is trying to protect that flank. But that's later in the day.
So Dodge falls back, reforms 2 up, 2 back. He in the process of doing that, Willich reforms as well, and eventually Dodge is left and Willich's right will connect with one another. So they'll actually form a line. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the men had the assuring touch of elbows right on either ends of their lines, but they're in contact with one another there. So Dodge's left and Willich's right are then protected. It's just Dodge's right that is left open. And remember, Dodge has folded his line, bent his line back just a little bit as well. So,
Why didn't they connect the Turchin?
well, because Turchin and Hazen and Cruft and Gross have all pulled back to the east as a result of Stewart's division's attack, and they're not any Federals immediately on that right.
If Turchin relieves Hazen or replaces Hazen, wouldn't they, I don't know, coordinate or something to where they would tie in their flanks?
Well,
you would think so,
yeah,
but with
right.
Johnson being so close, that was one of the things that
Well,
confused me why that gap was always there.
Within Turchin's brigade, there's difficulties because the lead 2 or the rear 2 regiments are grabbed without Turchin's knowledge and moved back down here before he gets up there near
Almost to the Kelly Field.
Yeah,
so.
and has to turn around. He realizes the staff officer finds him and says, "Your regiment are going," and so he has to turn around and look. And then he's going to ultimately attack that way, but that's another war. So,
Yeah, but
So you would just maintain your front and not worry about connecting to the units to your left?
oh
and
no!
right?
you worry about
yeah, Johnson and Willich and Dodge, they're all.
One of the first things I'd want to do is the.
yeah.
Oh, they're all worried about it, but.
And they're communicating to Thomas that their flanks are
Yeah.
exposed.
Yeah, but
And Thomas is trying to do something about that.
but it doesn't. It never gets fixed.
Right.
Yeah, and
There's
I just wondered why Hazen didn't just.
Palmer
Well-
can't stretch over here because they got to worry about Stewart and all
There's
that to the
there's
south.
other stuff going on that's
And Stewart, that's
They-
that's
they've-
mentioned the works they didn't expect.
Palmer, Gross, Cruft, Hazen, Turchin have all withdrawn in front of Stewart, driving northwestward. And
think of it this way: between 2 and 3 o'clock, while this stuff is stabilizing up here, there is a series of crises erupting all along the Union line south from Brotherton Field down into Vineyard Field, and each of those crises that erupts is taking more and more attention of Palmer, of Thomas, of Tom Crittenden, the Corps Commander, 21st Corps Commander, and the Brigade Commanders.
And that's why Brannon and Baird, from their position.
well,
when they
that's
come
why
back up-
that's why Brannon from his reorganization position gets sent to the south to deal with that crisis with Stewart.
And so because this front is relatively stable at the time, you know, when you're busy putting out fires, the part that's not on fire doesn't get as much attention.
Yeah.
If everybody's screaming, I need more support, but nothing's going on in front of you, you're like, well, you can wait a while until we take care of this.
And we're not really going to go into what happens in the evening, but before the Confederates attack, the order to withdraw at dark is coming down the chain of command from Thomas to Johnson and Baird to Scribner and Starkweather to Baldwin, Willich, and Dodge. And if the Confederates had attacked 15 minutes later, there might not have been anybody here for Claiborne to hit.
It'd be like Negley charging over in Brotherton Field. Nobody's here.
Yeah, nobody's here.
We think we're ready for a big fight.
Yeah.
Where'd they go?
Because a couple of Willich's regiments, but even before the Confederate attack, Claiborne's attack gets much momentum going against the line, a couple of Willich's regiments have actually literally already begun to pull back towards the Kelly Field. They then actually have to stop to get into the fight with Claiborne. But that's really a whole nother walk to look at what happens with Johnson's line, with Claiborne's twilight or evening attack. So let's make one more stop to do Willich, and then we'll head back to end this walk. To the rear of the 32nd Indiana Monument, Willich's original regiment. And I told the folks on the bus yesterday, and some of you all who might have just been around the battlefield the last couple of days, down in Vineyard Field, you probably saw some tents and scaffolding set up around the 58th Indiana Monument. Northern stone carving is here doing some restoration work on that monument, replacing a long missing wing on the Eagle. Once they finish the 58th Indiana Monument, they are moving here. And the wing of the 32nd Indiana. And in this case, we actually have the wing. When it got broken off, it was recovered. And I don't know. Now I can't remember whether we have all of the wing or not, because I know there was some effort to identify specifically where that wing went, and it was discovered that it is this monument, but I could not come that day, so when they had the lift out and took that piece up there, I don't remember now whether there might be some missing, but anyway, this monument's going to get a wing back.
Yeah, I'm very glad.
Yeah. But we're now in Willich sector. Willich, as we had the long discussion at the 49th Ohio marker, had initially been deployed 2 up and 2 back. The 49th Ohio on his left front, and the 32nd Indiana on his right front, advancing. But as we've described, as they make this charge to drive back Jackson and Maney, and also some of Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry, because what does Forrest like to do? Fight. And instead of using his cavalry to determine exactly where the Yankees are, and more importantly, are not, Forrest says, oh, they're Yankees, an opportunity to make more dead blue bodies. And he's in the fight. In fact, in this, as Willich and Baldwin advance and drive the remains of Jackson and then Maney back, and some of Forrest's cavalry, Huggins' battery, those guns over there that we walked past, part of Forrest's command, they get into some trouble in all of this. And who is it that helps rectify the situation and get the battery off of the field? It is Forrest himself. essentially thereby acting as a battery commander. And so what has he not got clear view of? The bigger picture. Yep. By this time, Liddell's division, Govan and Walthal's brigades have been reorganized. They're over here in the woods on the other side of the Winfrey Field. And they actually start feeling some of this federal advance. Willich actually advances beyond this position. Baldwin gets out to the Winfrey Field and will deploy with the 1st Ohio along the western edge of the field and the 5th Kentucky along the northern edge. And then on the to the 1st Ohio's right is the 49th Ohio. And they're actually going to wheel up onto the fence line of Winfrey Field as well. But Willich is now on a more extended line, and as he had advanced, he had moved his right rear reserve regiment, the 89th Illinois, forward, and that's their monument over there. Now they actually have pushed forward of that position, and they've gone to the edge of the clearing of the Winfrey Farmstead, which is just down the Alexander Bridge Road a short distance. But then they are going to pull back just a little bit, and Willich is going to have a formation of 3 regiments across his front. The 49th Ohio along the Winfrey Field fence line, the 32nd Indiana, and then the 89th Illinois. And what the Willich monuments here, the 89th Illinois, 32nd Indiana, 49th Ohio Monument, and 15th Ohio Monument, what they really represent is Willich's deployment dealing with the Claiborne's attack at dark. Although I think that line probably was actually a little bit further back.
By then, I think so, yeah.
By that time. But this Willich's line, as represented by the monuments here, really is the dealing with Claiborne's attack at dark. But Willich has pushed actually a little bit further to the front in this area with the 49th Ohio, 32nd Indiana, and 89th Illinois. And then to the left is Baldwin's brigade at Winfrey Field.
They charged all that distance?
Yes.
All that distance that we
yes,
kind of come
yes.
circuitously, but all the way
yes.
across that here.
Some of them say they attacked us a mile and a half.
Wow.
And Dodge in his report says, I forget, I think he says about a mile, and then he puts in parentheses, some of my colonels believe further.
Yes.
And,
so how did they?
So they wore down Jackson and Maney and then just cut straight through them?
Well, no, they just push them back. Of course, now there's also a change. Jackson is being driven back, Willich and Dodge and the regimental commanders all make it seem as if this Union charge is one just grand rush over that mile and a half's distance, but it takes some time. It's probably 2 hours of time.
The more personal accounts, the tactical accounts, go into often a great more detail. The 15th Ohio's regimental history has some detail. The 89th Illinois, for instance, talks about coming down here, getting disordered and starting to take fire and starting to fall apart. Willich shows up, calms the men, compliments them, and then actually puts them through a few minutes of just the basic manual of arms to steady them.
Under fire.
Yes, all under fire.
I asked that question. So all these distances, people are shooting at each other.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And they're not just walking around.
Nope.
So how do they handle the casualties and the logistics of getting more?
Well, there are men detailed as litter bearers, the infirmary corps as they're called, and any wounded soldier who can move himself are going to the rear, and then the litter bearers are supposed to be carrying the wounded who can't move themselves. The assistant surgeon is supposed to find a sheltered place not far behind the battle line to provide some initial care, and then the wounded are being moved back to the ambulances, which there's a designated place behind the division for them, and then they are to be carried either by the ambulance or on foot to the division field hospital. And Johnson's division field hospital gets located just on the south side of the Cloud Spring, which is up in Fort Oglethorpe. In Fort Oglethorpe, do you know where the Crystal fast food restaurant is? Just a little bit to the south of the Crystal, and just a little bit to the west of the road is the site of Cloud Spring. It's still there, but also not still there. When the military post of Fort Oglethorpe was created, they built an army building on top of the spring. They capped the spring to capture the water from the spring, and that was the water that was then used in the ice making plant for the post. And when the post was closed and the army buildings were sold off, the spring remained capped, and there is a medical office building on top of it today. And some of you all who are longtime residents of the area, John and Ned, that medical office building for many years was a collection of women's doctors. Although that's not the doctors that are in there anymore, but the spring was right under that, so that's the spring was, or the division field hospital was there, and that's where the wounded are being
that's
taken.
the nomenclature for Cloud Springs Road.
Well, right,
no?
but Cloud Springs Road is further to the north
Yeah,
today
it's further north than that.
yeah, right. But yes, so they push back, and over this time, there's enough time for Jackson to request relief. And for Maney to come forward and Jackson to go back and Maney to come engaged, and then Maney to largely get fought out himself, in addition to the effect with the fighting going on in Brock Field. Maney's left flank gets exposed, and so then Willich, Dodge, Willich, and Baldwin are then pushing Maney back. You've got Forrest up here on Maney's right, and they're being pushed back, and they don't really know it yet, but Willich and Baldwin in particular pushing Maney and Forrest back is actually bringing Walthall and Govan into the fight, and that they'll Baldwin will have to deal with them, and that is what is the threat to Baldwin's left, where Baldwin asked advice of Willich about how to deal with that. That is Govan and Walthall's threats.
So Maney and Straw get pushed back from the charge.
Maney and Jackson and Maney get pushed back by Johnson.
How far does Maney fall back to reform then?
Behind the Preston Smith Shell Monument there's a trail that leads to the southeast, and you go down that trail probably 300 yards, and the ground rises slightly, and you'll find the guns and tablets for a couple of Confederate artillery batteries there. That's where they pull back to. So, but what really stops the Federal advance is not just that artillery fire and some rifle fire from that new Confederate line, but it is it's Dodge's sudden realization that oops, there ain't nobody to my right, nobody to my left, and Willich's realization there ain't nobody to my right, and they don't want to push on any further.
Yeah, they just kind of slow down and stop it.
Right, and then they begin to see
kind of reform, I guess.
Right,
too.
then they see what the situation is, and they reform, which, as I described, Dodge reforms into the formation of 2 up, 2 back, and actually bends his line back to try to protect the right of the division as best he can.
So when they start their charge, that's when they drop their packs?
Well, they drop their packs at various points apparently as they moved into the woods on this side of the Kelly Field, kind of where we started, because the 1st Ohio and there's at least one other regiment where there's an account that after dark they lose some men. After they fall back to Kelly Field, they lose some men who go in search of their packs, and they apparently tried to get back out to where they had dropped their packs, but the Confederate skirmishers had advanced that far, and they get captured by the Confederates.
How big was Winfrey Field compared to what it is today?
It extended a little bit further to the south. Some maps suggest, but the park commission erected stones in the to mark field corners, and until a few years ago, until 2011, I think it is, all 4 of the Winfrey Field Park Commission field corner stones were still there. Today, there are just 3 of them. The one by the 1st Ohio Monument is now missing, but when you take some measurements from some of the maps that the veterans create, the field extended another 20 or 30 yards to the southeast of what it does today.
That way?
Yes, that way. Yeah. And you know, if we had time to go over there, Bassett Langdon's got a really nice description of arriving in the field, and he makes some estimates about the distances in front of his line, and when you take a minute with a compass to really line things up as he's describing it, he's pretty doggone accurate in his estimates of the distances.
We should head back.
Yeah, we've
before, in case we get scattered when we get back to the cars, we will start forming up again at 1:30.